Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the policy and politics correspondent at the New Statesman, Zoe Grunewald, and the political editor at The Sun, Harry Cole. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. So to the front pages, as ever, let's check those out. The Metro leading with the headline, saved from the storm, alongside a picture of a couple narrowly avoiding being swept out to sea in Yorkshire as Tom Kieran heads for the UK. The Financial Times features an image of the Israeli soldier who had been freed by Israeli Defence Forces. That photo is also on the front page of The Eye, but the paper leads with a story from the COVID inquiry, as top government advisers said Boris Johnson made it impossible for the country to tackle COVID. The Guardian leading with the Israeli Prime Minister ruling out a ceasefire in Gaza while declaring that this is a time for war. Front page of the Daily Star asks whether Uranus could be the key to helping scientists find aliens. The Telegraph also focusing on the soldier freed by Israel during an IDF raid in Gaza. Daily Mail, pawns of the terrorists there, picturing the 3 hostages featured in that Hamas video. And the Daily Mirror featuring a picture of Boris Johnson alongside the headline tragic joke, referencing the evidence given today by his former advisor at the COVID inquiry. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us and listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Zoe and Harry. Welcome to both of you. Shall we start with the very latest from the war? The Guardian, the Israeli Prime Minister ruling out a ceasefire, declaring this is a time for war. Obviously, many are demanding a ceasefire. We'll come to what the politicians in the UK have said about that. And picturing the Israeli soldier who was freed, fascinatingly, which pits, in a sense, the hostages' families once again against this ground offensive in some respects, or at least against the airstrikes, Harry.
Well, I think we don't know if it's... Well, I don't think we think she was freed. I think she was rescued is the crucial thing, and I think that actually might give some serious hope to the 200 other families, the odd families that are waiting for any sign of whether their loved ones are alive, whether there's any hope of getting them back. Yes, the ground offensive now has really begun to have started. Israeli tanks are quite far into the Gaza Strip in a way that they haven't been for so far in the last 3 weeks. This is really very much on now. It feels like all the footage that's coming out of Gaza as the phones go back on, as the communications come back on, shows that the Israelis are quite far into the Strip. At the same time, you've got this remarkable picture of this young woman who'd been rescued. I imagine a conscript. She doesn't look a day over 20 years old. Like, it is a phenomenal picture. At the same time, you've got the horror of the Hamas parade of 3 other women hostages being held. They weren't soldiers. They weren't soldiers. They were civilians. And you've just got a really stark contrast tonight between what Netanyahu is saying of why they must push on, why they must do what they do, and you've got the despair of of some families seeing their loved ones still in capture, and the utter joy on the faces of the rescued soldier.
Yeah, same photograph on the front page of the Financial Times as well. Israel rescues, as you put it, their first hostage. You know, the details of that eventually will be fascinating. But what about that issue of the ceasefire and, you know, the calls in this country by some who are asking for a ceasefire and finding, in a sense, they're being politically punished for that?
Yeah, so we know that Netanyahu has ruled out a ceasefire, as have Hamas. Both of them feel that this conflict needs to continue. They both have demands that the other side obviously aren't going to acquiesce to. And then, of course, we're seeing play out on the political field here in the UK, a number of MPs calling for a ceasefire, a number of members of the front bench have publicly called for a ceasefire. We also have prominent Labour politicians such as Andy Burnham, such as Sadiq Khan, and of course Conservative frontbencher as well, Conservative PPS. So we can see that actually this crosses kind of political lines as well. And really what it is about is trying to put an end to the suffering of people on both sides, and being able to get some of those humanitarian supplies into Gaza, and stopping the kind of indiscriminate killing of so many people who are trapped there.
There is a bit of there's a consensus now between the 2 front benches of Labour and the government of humanitarian pauses. quite a woolly term. No one's really actually defined whether that means minutes, hours, days, weeks. No one's quite got it. It's actually a fig leaf.
Or geographically specific
a
as well.
fig leaf for people to hide behind, actually, to make them sound like they're playing to both being the resolute defender of Israel and playing to the sort of audiences who are calling for a ceasefire. But I think you've got to really, strip down into what a ceasefire actually means. If Israel laid down their arms tomorrow, terrorists would swarm over their border and slit their throats and murder their wives and burn their babies again. That is what it means. Hamas are not going to respect a ceasefire. They've been firing rockets non-stop on Israel for years, since 2007. Now, if Israel laid out, if Hamas laid down their arms, there would be peace. That is what would happen. And so this idea that actually the onus is on Israel to be the ones that pause this, I think is deeply, deeply unfair.
Yes, at the very least, there may not be another Gaza incursion, but there might be time to regroup, which is what the argument against it is for many. The United Nations discussing it once again. The concern is that humanitarian aid is being overrun now. Civil society breaking down in Gaza, specifically after the blackout, if you like, of communications, which seems to be being restored. So, the pressure is on for humanitarian help. The incursion, it seems, may have split Gaza now. How people are then allowed to move south to southern Gaza becomes trickier for them, doesn't it? So, we're watching this in real time, but with questions still remaining.
It really is a humanitarian disaster. I think it's something like one child is killed every 10 minutes in Gaza. We know the population is particularly young. We know it's particularly vulnerable. When you compare the sort of resources that Gaza have with the resources of the Israelis, there really isn't anywhere for these civilians to hide or to shelter from. And we know that they've not been able to leave the country. They've not had access to the supplies they need. So it's really tragic to watch this happen, play out in real time. And of course, Israel will say it has a right to defend itself. It needs to go in there and get the hostages back. But the real question is, how does this end? And, the worry is, will Gaza and the people of Gaza be flattened alongside this? So the question is how this can be done kind of proportionately, how Israel can get back its hostages.
What is a proportionate response to slitting people's throats in their sleep on a Saturday morning and putting babies in ovens and burning corpses and tying people together and shooting them with one bullet through the same two heads? What is a proportionate? There is no proportionate response to that. That's the point.
I don't think that's
the catch-22. Is who is anyone? Who is the UN? Who is Andy, whatever his name, some Labour backbencher? Who is some junior PPS from the Tory, some bag carrier from the Tory party, to tell anyone who's just been through what Israel has been through, and has been through, really, frankly, for decades, of what is a proportionate response? We have no right to lecture this country on what they should be able to do.
I think everyone sensible condemns the actions of Hamas, absolutely. It's absolutely appalling, that terrorist attack. Of course. But, there are innocent people living in Palestine. As I said, many of them, almost half the population, are children. And, war in any context has to be within the bounds of international law. And that means that civilians are given supplies, hospitals are protected. And unfortunately, as you say, part of Hamas's strategy is to hide within the civilian population.
That's the grim catch-22. How do you free a population that's also repressed by Hamas when Hamas is living amongst them?
Yeah.
Well, once again, the picture of this young soldier, this young private, Ori Megadish, pictured on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. If we take a look at that as well. Israel frees kidnapped soldier in Gaza raid. Netanyahu's tanks roll into the main city for the first time as Hamas releases videos of more hostages. And certainly we had footage today of an Israeli tank appearing to fire on a car just south of Gaza City, which, as you've suggested, shows how far they've pushed in this incursion so far. Yeah,
those pictures are verified, I think, by multiple international media outlets, finally geolocated tonight. We don't know who was in the car, but it does show that quite how far they are.
The journalist suggests a whole family is in it, the journalist who filmed it, but
again,
some distance away.
Some distance away, but also we don't know. That is the issue. But this is the way that we see a war now. Can you imagine if conflicts of the past had been live streamed on social media and mobile phones and cameras in the way that they do now? Would we ever have been able to fight the Second World War? I don't think we probably would, because there would have been, it's a very strange world we're living in, where there's sort of war is through. Even the sort of Gulf Wars of the 90s and the 2000s, they had embedded journalists with them. They didn't have everyone, citizen journalists everywhere, filming everything. It's a really remarkable way that everything, suddenly, every micro decision and every single tiny thing is sort of played out live on social media with people picking sides. It creates a really strange atmosphere of how a conflict could possibly be resolved when the global community is, sort of almost horribly watching it, like it's, a box set.
So to the COVID inquiry, hearing from the top apparatchiks, if you like, at Downing Street during this time. And goodness me, what we learned. And some excoriating criticism, has to be said, against the former Prime Minister, Harry.
Yeah, there's an amazing part of some of the WhatsApp evidence that was shown today at the COVID inquiry. And we're getting into the really sort of box office bits of this. It's the what happened in those days, those awful days in March, where the sort of scenes of Italy were creeping closer and closer to our shores. And there's this brilliant bit where it goes, do you reckon any of this is going to be up in a public inquiry at some point and we should be careful about what we say? And they'll go, yeah, we should be careful about what we say. And then proceed to spend the next 2 years just slagging each other off. It is phenomenal. And actually, Simon Case, who's the most senior Mandarin in the country at the time, he wasn't necessarily, I think, when he said some of these particularly sassy comments about Boris Johnson, but he was right in the heart of the COVID response, essentially saying that the Prime Minister was unable to lead. He was a shopping trolley veering all over the shop, and at some point,
let it rip one day.
Let it rip one day, and it's a machine. He's basically saying he's the sort of master of government. He's a man that's written great doctorates about the art of government and the workings of Whitehall. And actually, he was saying it's not actually that hard, but you've got to be able to give clear, decisive messages. And it's just sort of frustrations that have come out at that time. Did we learn anything massively new that we didn't already kind of suspect? And no, I don't think so. But my God, when they say that you don't want to see how the sausages are made, this is what they're talking about.
And the idea is that Boris Johnson kind of favoured more of a Swedish response. He's a libertarian, doesn't really want to stop anybody doing something. And then it was kind of forced upon him, effectively. And he was still fighting it all the way through. You got this impression, didn't you, really?
I think part of Johnson's approach throughout government was to really do a lot of policy that he thought would make him popular. And things like lockdowns clearly don't make him popular with the country or backbenchers. But it soon became clear that actually that was what other countries were doing, Italy, France, Spain, and that he had to follow suit. But yeah, I mean, it's been an extraordinary day, and the COVID inquiry just kind of keeps on giving in terms of shocking psychodrama between politicians. And what is a bit of a shame is obviously one of the things that we do need to touch on this is how we can prevent, many more deaths when there is ultimately another pandemic. And although it is, it's interesting and it's scandalous to hear about how government was working at this time, it's also really sad. There are the bereaved families here, and we need to know exactly where the mistakes were made and how they can be prevented for next time.
But also, I mean, we've got to look at the fact, and I think what a slight issue I have with the line of questioning that we've seen so far, and I've watched and listened to quite a bit of this now, is they sort of seem to have made up their mind about what the right thing to do was already, and they're actually sort of just exposing all the times that everyone didn't go against what has been the established groupthink that lockdown good, economy go to hell. And actually now we're living through the long tail of the COVID lockdown, and the fact that, a lot of the people weren't just saying, let's let them die for the sake of it. They're saying, we are going to crash our country into an economic recession, the likes of it has never been seen. Are we sure? Do we do this? And I do wonder whether actually, in the long run, given now what we know about lockdown, now what we know about Sweden, and now what we know about other countries that didn't go into quite the same depths of shutdown that we did, and actually had a fairly similar outcome on the results of COVID, actually maybe that debate was the right thing to do.
Front page of the FT as well. Similar, Johnson changed direction every day as the crisis mounted. Quick 30 seconds on your story if you don't... Well, that's not very good quality, is it? I can't read that one at all. Good job, we're moving on. Anyway, to the Sun. Very quickly, Germans to cost the UK 6,000 jet jobs.
Big old fight going on at the moment. We are trying to sell Saudis 48 of our Typhoon fighters, which we've co-built with Germany. Germany is saying, no, they're in a coalition with the Greens that don't want to sell them to the Saudis because they're possibly used in Yemen. What that does actually mean is that basically BAE have told ministers that means that our Typhoon production in this country is going to go bust. It's going to be economically unviable, and that's a £15 billion blow that's going to go to France. So another win for Brexit.
The Metro, just quickly, saved from the storm. Miracle as Kieran heads for the UK. Zoe and Harry, we'll see you soon.